Jonathan Doherty's book, Secrets, is the true story that takes you on his journey through brokenness and despair that will captivate you, encourage you, and ultimately motivate you to live your own life to the fullest. It is a story of a man who had a secret, one that shaped his view of life and relationships for 13 years. Secrets is Jonathan's story of overcoming addiction, infidelity, and finally finding the path that led him to a place of true peace and freedom. Whether you are living a double life of secrecy and lies or not, Secrets will move you to reconsider how you live your life from this moment on, challenging you to live each day with no more regrets. Secrets, a true story of addiction, infidelity, and second chances, is available wherever Christian books are sold or on the book's website at www.secretsbook.net. Welcome to Pure Sex Radio, training men, educating women. Are you ready to get real and start living each day in purity? This dynamic program is designed to educate, encourage, and equip listeners with the tools necessary for living a life of sexual purity. Pure Sex Radio brings you the best in mobile talk radio. Listen to real-life struggles, learn how to overcome lust, pornography, and sex addiction, and get serious about purity. Your hosts for Pure Sex Radio are Jonathan Doherty and Stephen Cervantes. Jonathan is the director of Be Broken Ministries and founder of the Gateway to Freedom Workshop for Men. Stephen is the founder of the Hope Counseling Center. Visit us online at puresexradio.com. And now, please welcome Jonathan and Stephen on Pure Sex Radio.
Good day, radio listeners. Welcome to this week's edition of the Pure Sex Radio broadcast. We're glad that you've decided to join us today. My name is Jonathan, and I'm here with Stephen. Stephen, how are you doing this morning?
I am good. Thank you for inviting me to join the show.
Yeah, well, I mean, it wouldn't be any fun without you here.
Okay.
Well, before we get started, I wanted to let you know of a resource. I mean, believe it or not, it's so hard for me to believe that we're at the beginning of yet another school year. And, with that, the craziness of that, the schedules, the homework, all those kind of things that are part of a school year.
You have little kids still,
yeah.
young ones. Mine are grown.
Well, they're not little anymore, but they definitely are heavily involved in their school stuff. And so we know that sometimes as a family, things can get really chaotic, and that means that sometimes it might not be on the front of your mind to think about protecting your home regarding the internet. There's a lot of stuff that can get into your house just through the internet these days that is not healthy for kids or for adults. And so we're a partner with Covenant Eyes, and we have actually all of our computers here at the office are protected with Covenant Eyes, and they have great customer service. We just think they're a good resource for being able to not only have filtering but also what they call keystroke logging, which means that everywhere that a person goes on the internet is tracked, and then an accountability partner, if you're a parent, then you could be the one to check those reports from your kids. So if you'd like more information about Covenant Eyes, you can just go to CE, that's the letter CE.bebroken.com to learn more about the Covenant Eyes software. Well, Stephen, this week we're going to be talking about trying to answer this question: how do you know if a guy is really changing? So how do you know if a guy who is in recovery from a sexual addiction is really changing? And this is a question I think that a lot of wives ask. Sometimes I think it's a question that even the guys in recovery ask. How can I know if I'm changing? And so I want to launch with a story, because this is a difficult question sometimes. I wish it was as easy as saying, well, just look for this one thing. And if this one thing is in place,
right,
then they're changing. But it's a lot more complex than that, because, we've had I know of some stories where A guy starts his recovery and he's doing all the right things. He's going to group. He's going to see a counselor. He's changing some habits in his home. And so his wife is under the impression that there are things that are changing. This goes on for quite a while, a couple of years. And yet the problem is the underlying lying and behaviors have not actually stopped. And I mean, how devastating is that,
Wow, yeah.
And yet
another lie on top of the last bunch of lies.
And so, sometimes we might hear stories like that and we go, well, what's the point? And how can a wife know? How is there any way to know if a guy is changing? And so this broadcast, we want to just kind of offer to you, our listeners, a lot of different ideas, some things that might be helpful to form more of a tapestry, so to speak, of what change looks like, rather than saying this one thing or these two things here are all you need to look for in whether change is happening. And I think before we jump into this, I also want to sort of prepare our listeners by saying, even though we are going to be giving a lot of ideas, we are not necessarily inviting you to make this a list like these are the ironclad things that will prove that change is happening, because change is so much more, wouldn't you agree? Change is much more complicated than just even the ideas we're going to share that we believe are essential and helpful.
It's difficult. Growth and changing is difficult. And we know that some men, a lot of men that come to the weekend, Gateway to Freedom weekend, really have their eyes open and change. Mm-hmm. And some men go home and just keep doing what they've been doing. It really depends on the hardness of heart.
Yeah.
And some people don't want to be softened. I mean, they are fighting their God. So some guys will come and receive healing, and some will go home sort of with a few ideas, but they don't really intend to change. And we've seen that at church. You and I have talked about that a number of times in the groups we've done. Some men will come in for 3 visits, and I mean, they have all the answers. They have the biblical truth and insight. They are so aware. And after the 4th visit, they quit.
Yeah.
Because it's long. It's hard. You have to dig in. You have to be real. It's like you have to ask a man, are you committed to this change? Are you willing to walk this out the rest of your life? Because you got a weak spot in you. And if you don't work on that weak spot, that's where Satan's coming, evil's coming. That's where the break is going to happen,
So I think this broadcast is going to, my hope is that it will be helpful for the wives and family members out there who maybe, you've got a husband or a son or a dad who is entered into recovery. The truth about his sexually addictive behaviors come back. He's entered into recovery, and now you're maybe feeling that anxiety about, well, how do I know? Because really, I think the reason that a lot of wives ask this question is, I love this man and I want to trust him again, but I really feel like I need a foundation on which there's real change happening and not just more manipulation and wooing me with his words. And so, Stephen, let's try to help. And
Sure.
the other part of this too is I hope that this is also an encouragement to the men out there
Yes.
who are in recovery, so that they might be able to look at this as maybe some markers. How am I doing? Is real change occurring in my life, or am I just kind of pretending too?
Yeah, and this is a dialogue. It would never be presented as an end-all.
Absolutely, yeah.
We hope you go on with your conversation, and we know some men use these podcasts for their group. I mean, we are literally audio mentors to some groups out there that we've heard about, and so we appreciate that. And it might be a conversation for a wife, or a husband and wife, or a group. We hope we can have a conversation about what are you going to see? What's it going to sound like? What's he going to say? What's he going to do if he's making changes? Mm-hmm. So what do you got on your list?
Well, one of the first things that I thought of in trying to think about how can you know if a guy's really changing is that there is an initiative that he takes regarding his recovery. In other words, previously, I think a guy in addiction, he's simply living a reactionary life. I mean, he's just reacting to life. He's reacting to his wife. He's reacting to situations. He's reacting to his urges. He's reacting to his emotions. Everything's reactionary. And now he's learned to cope by his reaction is escape, isolate, disconnect, and act out. So now, I think one of the things that you can see that's a significant, when you really start seeing a guy that his heart is changing and he's, if I can put it this way, serious about his recovery, is he's going to take the initiative. He's going to be one to initiate going to a group. He's going to be one to initiate setting up an appointment with a counselor.
Oh, you mean she doesn't have to make him, and she doesn't have to remind him and tell him?
Yeah, he's going to be... Now, it's real messy at the beginning, I believe, because a lot of times the panic that occurs in a wife is a lot of times we've seen a lot of wives that they just take control and they start kind of dictating his recovery. And whatever. I don't care about that. We're talking about change here. We're not necessarily talking about all the mechanics. To me, when a guy really starts to change, he is taking ownership.
Yeah.
Because initiative is ownership. Me saying, I'm going to go to this group, not because my wife wants me to or it would look good or whatever. No, I'm choosing to go to this group.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to initiate that. To me, initiative is a huge
That's good.
indicator of some change.
So at the beginning, I would also have a sense of brokenness. And it's funny because I don't know that there's always one giant broken, right? I think we cry out, we ask God for help, and sometimes we get stupid again, and then we are face down on the floor asking for help again. But there's a sense that my life is a mess, and I'm a broken mess, and I need help. There's just the admission, I would say, of brokenness is a part of this process.
And something that I would add to that is, because as you were saying that, I thought, really growth and change in life, especially as it pertains to our relationship with God, is sort of a continual growth in being broken. And what I mean by that is, guess what? I still have to wake up in the morning today and admit my weaknesses before God and right. ask for help and confess where I've fallen short. And so even in that, there's a brokenness in saying it may not be to the same level of intensity as like, hey, I've been sleeping with prostitutes and there's a different intensity maybe in those moments or season of brokenness, but you're right. I think it's an ongoing thing, and I think an aspect that's part of that is confession, a willingness to confess, because and I want to try to define confession, because I think sometimes we see it in a certain way and it may not be what real confession is. I see confession as a willingness to agree with the truth without holding on to any excuses. Because how many times, Stephen, have you seen a guy that quote-unquote confesses, but it's followed up with, but,
right,
and there's an excuse attached to it. It's like, that's not true confession. Confession is agreeing with the truth without any excuses attached to it.
So I also listed with my brokenness a sense of openness versus closed, private, secretive, a sense that I have to be more open if I'm going to learn and grow. And I have to admit in my openness, I don't know some things. I'm struggling in some areas.
And so part of what you're saying there, would you say that coincides a little bit with gaining more of an attitude of humility?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think to be open, you kind of have to be vulnerable.
I got that on my list, humility also.
And
I don't know. I have to be humbled and say, I don't know. Because I can put the con on and make you think I'm the wow guy.
Yeah.
But when a man says, I don't really know, I want to think about that. Let's not go slow. That's really interesting. Let's think about that. What do I believe? Let me go inside me.
Can we talk about that for just a little bit? Because I'm thinking of the guys out there listening and going, that sounds good. What do I do with my fears concerning opening up? Because Maybe they've been burned in the past. Maybe they were taught some of the things we talked about in a previous broadcast, some of those lies about, I got to be right. I've got to be the competent one. I got to be the strong one.
So shouldn't you capture your fears? I mean, everybody is predictable and knowable, okay? You don't come up with a brand new fear today you've never had, right? We got a couple, 2 or 3 fears that drive us all. And wouldn't it be better to identify those fears? And you said in the last show, sometimes when I don't feel strong and in control, I get scared. Well, that's one of your core fears. Mm-hmm. There's not going to be a new one added next week.
Right.
I mean, you're going to have these 2. And so if you know those fears and you can write them down or own them or say them, I mean, it's a huge thing you said. I have this fear that when I'm not in control, it may go spin out of control, or it may be chaotic. It may not go well. So yes, it's very scary. But isn't it better to turn and face the fear than to practice the old coping?
And that to me hits on the issue of how can you know if a guy's really changing? Mm-hmm. He's going to address those things. He's going to admit.
What things?
He's going to admit, I'm scared to open up.
Yes.
So part of this, I would say, too, is, you talk about openness, being connected to humility. I think it's also connected to honesty. Yes. Like a brutal honesty, the kind that says, it's one thing for me to say, here's what I've been doing. I've been going out and looking at porn, or I've been soliciting prostitutes. It's one thing to be honest about that. It's another thing to go to another level of honesty and say, I'm scared to death of what's next. I don't know what's next in my marriage. I'm scared to open up. I'm scared to be really vulnerable with other men or with my wife.
And so you're saying own your fears, right?
I'm saying own them in the sense that I'm going to be honest enough to say, like you said, I don't know. I don't know what to do with my fears. I don't know. And just put yourself in a context where there might be some wisdom and help and guidance and support. A group counselor.
Right.
But to me, wouldn't you say those are huge indicators that a guy's really
changing?
No,
absolutely. You are absolutely right. That's a deep level. I bet that guy's never told anybody that.
Yeah.
If a guy says that to his wife, if he writes in his journal, says, I can't tell you, but read my journal. I'm scared to tell you this, but read it. I want you to know. That's huge.
Yeah.
And the other word I wrote down, so we've got like initiative, confession, admission and brokenness, openness, humility, honesty, and I put confusion down. I think a guy that's moving forward into the unknown.
If he seems like he's got it all together, something's wrong.
No, that's exactly right. If his presentation is too good, if he says, no, dear, I got it all figured out, went to group, I had 3 visits, I got it. I know if I'm looking good or if I'm rock solid, you better be scared.
That's when you and I say, let's tell you again what this process is all about, because you're not quite getting it. But yeah, that's an interesting thing to, because that's not one of those things that I think would be a first thought in a guy in recovery, or even his wife, that he should be sort of confused, a little bit dazed.
Yeah. And you say that at the seminar about chaos, right?
Yeah.
You know where you're going, man? You're going into chaos, because if you do all your known routines, you're going backwards. You better go into some chaos and discomfort and confusion and unknown and trying new things, because then you might get to a new place.
Yeah. And so, that's, I can almost feel some of the wives out there going, that's not what I wanted to hear. Because she's already feeling confused
turn
enough.
Turn off the radio quick. We don't want to scare you.
But you know what I mean?
We want to tell you the truth.
And that's exactly it. There are wives that may be getting extremely frustrated with their husbands because he's like, I don't know, I'm confused.
Why don't you give them a template and cure them?
Yeah.
Well, growth is a process, right?
Yeah.
And some days, people get tired of this journey.
Well, and one of the other things that I put down here that I think is an indicator of this long-term transformation, because I want that to be, said here too. This is what we're talking about here. When you're really talking about how do you know if a guy's really changing, you have to give yourself a big time frame.
That's right.
You can't give yourself a 1 month, 60-day time frame. I mean, the things we're talking about are really transformations on a heart level. And so if I were to put it on a timeline, some of the stuff we're even talking about here isn't even recognized until maybe 6 months in, 4 to 6 months. It's like, and then that's sort of the starting point of some of these things happening. So again, I'm not saying that to discourage wives or even discourage guys out there that are struggling, but it's just a long journey.
Yeah, but you're probably right. There's some frustrated wives going, why can't he just do a 5-point checklist and clean this thing up?
And here's the thing. He could, but here's what you don't want to happen. And wives, I promise you don't want this to happen. Prior to your husband getting in recovery, he was putting a mask over his addiction through performing. He was performing in a certain way. You call it people have a social presentation.
Yeah.
He was performing in a certain way so that he looked a certain way to you.
Very acceptable, very likable.
Behind that mask, all of the addictive behaviors are going on.
Right.
What you don't want to happen is for him to just bring that mask into recovery. So that he's going to group, he's going to counseling, he
does the 5 points.
His presentation is good.
Get off my back. Get off my back. I'm doing my 5 things I'm supposed to do.
And yet nothing behind that mask is actually transforming or changing. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of guys that's what they do. They bring their performance mask into recovery, and it's like none of the stuff we're talking about here is actually happening. They're not being open. They're not really confessing. They're not broken. So the other thing I was going to say that to me is a huge indicator of if a guy is changing is that gratitude starts to replace complaining or criticism. Because most guys who have a deeply embedded addictive pattern, these are not grateful people. They're not. They're cynical. They're critical. They complain. They're just frustrated, agitated, irritated people. And
so what would they be grateful for? What would you start hearing some gratitude about?
I know for me, I'll just share it from my perspective because in terms of how God has really softened my heart over the years and given me more of a grateful heart. And one of the first things was my gratitude was towards God's grace, that He is the God, not only of second chances, but of a gazillion chances.
That's good.
That my gratitude was that He thinks that I'm worth saving, worth recovery. He thinks I'm worth, changing. And so that my heart started softening that way. Certainly I was grateful for my wife wanting to still be in my life. I've been grateful for the opportunities He's given me to serve others. So just gratitude starts to replace a lot of the idea of, life sucks, it's unfair, nothing happens right in my life. And so instead, it's like you start to just have sort of a grateful. And I tell guys all the time, if they want kind of a barometer for maybe how well they're progressing, to me, this is one of those things. Are you still complaining? Are you still full of criticism? Are you still thinking life's totally unfair to you? Are you unappreciative of God's grace? Are you thinking you deserve? If that's still in place, I kind of think no matter how well you're doing with the behaviors, you're not really changing. I mean, you got a long ways to go to.
It's funny because I wrote down defiance should be down. And so it's the opposite of what you're saying, but I think it's a complementary of what you're saying. If I'm defying you less, if I'm being defiant, if I'm defending myself less, that's a good indicator.
Right.
But then move it over to where it's supposed to be. Gratitude is where it's supposed to end up. Another thing I would say is there should be a sorrowful or grieving spirit. I'm sorry for what I've wasted. I'm sorry what I've done. I'm sad. I can't believe I'm waking up and owning what's going on. But then that could also move towards gratitude.
Right. And I would even say, I would add to the idea of sorrow and grieving that there's a growing empathy for what you have caused in others, the pain that you've caused. You start to empathy. You really, your sorrow isn't just in the sense of, I did these horrible things to my wife. Your sorrow is, I've tried as best I can to see what I've done from her perspective, and I'm really grieved. I'm broken over this. I'm shattered at the effect that this has had. One of the other things too, kind of along the idea of you saying defiance is going down, is I wrote down here that a guy he grows in being non-defensive when he's falsely accused.
Well, okay, explain that. Non-defensive, falsely accused.
What ends up happening a lot of times is a wife is obviously going to have a lot of fears and anxieties, right? After the truth comes out. So it's not an uncommon thing for a wife to periodically, out of her fear and anxiety, accuse her husband of doing something that he wasn't doing. Were you on the internet? Why were you 15 minutes late? Were you doing, those kind of things? And it's born out of her fear. So, it's okay. It is what it is. But sometimes what happens is a guy will continue to have his defensive self up. And he might feel justified, too, because he's like, I wasn't doing anything wrong, so I'm justified to just fight back. I think when you really start seeing some significant heart change is a guy who's willing to say, based on my history, I'm willing to take some shots on the chin that I don't deserve, but for the sake of peace and growth and restoration in my relationships, I will allow myself to be falsely accused and not try to defend myself.
Because it's coming from pain and sorrow on her end, right?
And here's the thing that I want the guys out there to hear. Please, turn up your radio right now, because this is the thing that I want you to hear. The truth needs no defense. If you are walking in truth, if you are not acting out, you are doing the right things, you are taking initiative, you've embraced your recovery, who cares if you get falsely accused? You don't need to defend the truth. The truth doesn't need a defense. If you're walking in the truth and your wife says, I think you were looking at porn, you don't need to get all defensive about that. It's okay for her to have those feelings. It's her fears. How can you serve her in that moment with her fears?
So I wrote down willingness is also a quality or character, a sense of a willingness. I have two. Willingness is one of them, to hear correction, willingness to explore, willingness to be vulnerable. And then my last one is participation with others. You can't, this alone thing by yourself. We get goofy in the head. We get bad. We mess up alone. But when we're in community and fellowship, so those would be the two I would add. Is he willing, and is he working with brothers?
Mm-hmm. What are some other things that you could think of as we look to wrap up our time here that might just be an encouragement to the men or the family members that are in this? Because, we're trying to answer this question. How do you know if a guy is really changing?
So I'll give you the shortcut version I tell wives. Watch his behaviors. Is he doing the right things? And then listen for new language, new ideas, new insight. Is he saying new things that he hasn't said before? So new behaviors, new language, and is he on a growth mission? Is he talking about growth and growing and changing? Is he admitting that he's moving?
Yeah.
So watch the behaviors. But not only that, listen to the language. Guess what I learned in group? Or look at this book. I have a book. I want you to read this. Look at this new idea I have. New language, right? And then does he take ownership that I have to grow? Can't stay stuck.
And I would encourage both the men in recovery as well as their wives and family members to keep in mind that change is process-oriented.
Yes.
It's very easy for both the guy in recovery and those who love him to be looking for a destination. Like, well, I want you to get to this point. And if we're really talking about change, everything we've talked about here is really fluid. It's something that we can continue to grow in. These are not things that are static.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it be brokenness or willingness or, taking initiative, gratitude, these are not things that you go, okay, he's reached the pinnacle of gratitude.
Right.
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 So keep in mind that this is process oriented. And I think over time, if these things are happening, you will be able to look back periodically and go, wow, there's been significant growth here. And that's a good thing. Well, we are out of time, but we're glad you've been with us, and we look forward to having you back here again next week on the Pure Sex Radio broadcast.
Pure Sex Radio is paid for by Be Broken Ministries. Visit us online at puresexradio.com.